What is it? Precise confusion.
Life's confusion.
We're in.
Awesome title.
Yeah. So, I mean, I mentioned this at the end of last times, and Aaron, you brought this up, precise confusion, which is apt. And the interesting thing is this chapter is all about why the Gunter's chain was so important, right? All this history of mismeasurement, and deceit in measurement, and we get into quite a bit of the economic side of that. Um, but now we've come full circle that as surveyors retracing descriptions that have chains or rods or links, we get into quite a bit of confusion now of what was this super precise tool back then. We don't even understand our role in retracing a chain when we've got a total station that is high accuracy, high precision, a GPS that can precisely measure on the ground, and gives us results out to the 10,000th of a foot, and we ignore the rules of evidence and what the chain could accomplish, and what it did accomplish very well in its time, and we say we can measure better. And so I just want to again give a reminder about when we are doing retracement surveys and we see something called out in chains, the precision of the chain is exactly that, right? There's error inherent in that compared to how we can measure today, but we must respect the history that in surveying and the time in which that deed was written or measured or the survey was done. And so when we see those, there's some looseness in retracing, right? We're not exactly four chains and here's the precise location and that's the property corner. You have to go out and search for evidence in a larger area, understanding how that was measured back then. So jumping in here, so it says what made the Gunter's chain unique among commonly used measurements this was that it did not vary, and the author goes into quite a number of different examples of how measurements varied, and I was not familiar with any of these when I first read or reread the book. Certainly we've explored those in some of our history classes or survey classes, but how varied some of this was quite unique. So this first paragraph talks about what a chain might measure in a woodland area versus a dense forest area. So it might be 22 yards in a woodland and 24 yards in a dense forest, or up to 32 yards. Open country is 22 and a dense forest 32 yards. But the Gunter's chain was consistent, right? It was what it was. And he says in 1607 it would have been hard to find anything that was so consistent as far as measurements. So I thought I'd throw it out here to kind of get the discussion going. In our research and our work, have we ever experienced these are, 1607 is so long ago, but have we ever run into cases where these measurements aren't or weren't what we thought they were today in today's nomenclature versus what they were back then?
So one of the things, like, again, this first paragraph is absolutely summary of the title of it, because he was trying to make, or they are trying to make the chain itself take out the error. If you're going across this type of land, you use the 22. If you're going across this type of land, you use 24. Who makes that decision? You know, who's going to pay you to use the 32-yard chain to make their land bigger? So, in that, it tried to take out the error, but it actually introduced error. And it's kind of like golf. If you're got a 156-yard shot into the wind, you're going to use a 6-iron. Downhill with the wind, you're going to use an 8-iron. how are you measuring this? So to have Gunter's chain be the standard, I mean, it's that was revolutionary in 1607. That was amazing.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Like, only because I play golf, but yeah, I love it.
Well, and so now to kind of continue that on is it's this next paragraph they talk about the economics of it. So he talks about a candy bar. Candy bar manufacturers do the same today, right? We were just talking about this at work. We had the mini, what used to be fun size is now like mini size. You know, they just keep getting smaller, but they still cost the same. And he said back then there was this resentment in the increasing of price versus getting something smaller. We don't notice so much that it was getting smaller, but we definitely notice when the cost goes up. And Joey threw into the chat shrinkflation.
I just saw that. Yep.
Yeah, it's ruining grandma's cookie recipes. If you go get a can of condensed milk, it's smaller and the chemistry doesn't work anymore.
Oh, good point.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. You know, and so it says the Vatican had fear of riots because of the price of bread. In 13th century England, the king permitted bread sellers to change the weight of a farthing loaf. And a farthing, it defines a farthing was a quarter of a penny, but not the price. It was not able to be changed. We go through all these examples of where the monarchies, the leaders of the time, were very concerned with measurements and equality in this, and a lot of that is because they wanted to get their part. We talked a lot about this in chapter 1. You know, even going back to the example of a 22 yard measurement versus a 32 yard measurement, right? The purpose of that is to measure what the ground could yield. And so in an open field, it can yield a lot more grain or hold a lot more livestock, and in a dense forest, it's less usable to the tenants of that. So then the king would get less yield out of their taxes, and so but the king wanted to make sure he got his fair part. So they often enacted laws in order to regulate that. And looking at this, I didn't know this. The Netherlands and the Dutch areas there were actually notoriously known for their equality and their precise measurements. But it even says there that they had their own issues. Even in the financially sophisticated Netherlands, where banks, corporations, and a stock exchange existed from the 16th century, it remained the custom in the textile markets to charge the same price per stone, about 14 pounds, for good flax from Zealand. As for the inferior kind, Brabant, but to make up the difference, they used a lighter weight for the stone. And then the next paragraph there, just as an acre of rust pasture was larger than an acre of meadow, which could produce hay, so a bushel of oats, which would only make a porridge, held more than a bushel of wheat. And so it was all about what they could get out of that. So how would we, if we're measuring today a parcel of land, how do you think our clients would react if we were measuring it by its usefulness?
Well, to a certain extent, don't we take some things like that in consideration when we consider errors of a corner placement in an urban area versus a rural area?
By state statute, you do, right? Because it's, could be to the 100th on the Las Vegas Strip to plus or minus the half a foot in a rural area, right? So
when I would
looking
say
at
to
it not
that,
only from a land value
yeah,
perspective, but also from a liability perspective.
yeah, yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
yep.
But surveyors are going to survey, and tax assessors are going to assess.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah, Jerry, you're right, but I didn't even think of that one as well. So we make those decisions. And so maybe back to what Aaron said, who was making that decision, and how did they make that? How do we determine the precision in which we are assigning that error, how we assign that error, whether it's urban or not urban? What rules do we use to regulate ourselves?
Ours in today's standard, this is based on statute, right, or code. Sometimes it's defined by populations. Less than 50,000 would be rural, more than 50,000 maybe urban. Like, I mean, there's statutes, at least our statutes kind of define that. We have had some NAC changes recently that kind of went away from that aspect of it, but the older statutes used to go by population based.
How about some of our other states? Do you guys have those same rules in your code?
Wisconsin, we don't. It's just a straight standard that we have. There's no breakdown based on population worth of land.
So in South Carolina, our standards are whatever you're going to certify. A Class A survey has to be 1 in 10,000 closure. If you're going to be doing a farm survey, that could be 1 in 5,000 closure. If you're doing just a huge country survey, that could be 1 in 3,000 closure. So there's a Class A, B, and C survey.
How is that determined? Is that determined by the land type, or is it between the surveyor and the client?
Surveyor and the client.
Okay.
Leaves it to interpretation, right? That's
Well,
interesting.
negotiable.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
A more accurate survey takes a lot more to do. There's more of a fee involved in that to be able to meet those standards.
It is. And if you're out in the middle of nowhere surveying a farm, 1 in 5,000 closure may be good enough for what they want to do. Now, a Class A survey being 1 in 10,000, you're just doubled your effort, really.
But you're limiting accuracy, or you're changing the accuracy, but are you changing the liability that the surveyor assumes under those different classes and stuff?
Well, I've never been sued, so I don't know the answer to that.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Thank goodness.
Uh,
Well,
You
I
could
guess
be our test case.
I guess the question I'd have is do our clients even understand that, or are we just, so TK said, in Nevada that's written into statute. I'm trying to think through, and I can't think that there is anything in Utah statute, but I think we've got some model standards in the Utah Council of Land Surveyors. But I can't think that we have anything in our statute that talks about when a certain accuracy needs to be employed. But do our clients understand that? Are we educating them? Are we having those discussions? And Aaron, maybe I throw it back to you to see, if you get a survey request, are they specifically asking for that level, or is that a discussion you're having with them on the back end?
So it's just like doing an Alta survey. You're going to fill out those Table A requirements, which define my scope. We're going to have a discussion about scope of services and deliverables before I give you a price or a product, for that matter. So, what accuracy are you, as the client, looking for? What is your intended purpose with this survey? If this is just a survey so that, sometime in the future you can cut off an acre when you own 2,000 acres.
Here in Florida, I'm
Or
sorry, my name is Eugenio, but everyone calls me Gino. It's easier to pronounce. Here in Florida, we follow the Florida Administrative Code, Chapter 5J17. We don't regularly use closure notes, but I know that is supposed to be it's a mathematical closure, and if the client requested, we can provide it, but it's usually 0.01 feet for each 5,000 feet of perimeter, independently of how small or large the lot is.
Okay, so some similar statutes there.
Yeah,
Now I don't want.
I was sharing the screen. Some of this we did. We're in the middle of doing some LCB changes at the moment, so working on some of the new publications. But this was the current standard until about September 1st. But there is some new ones. I was trying to find the new LCBs, but this was kind of what we defined: high urban, low urban, high rural, lower rural, as I showed on the stats earlier. But this was kind of the way we do it.
So again, here in South Carolina, there are some municipalities which, if they put out an RFP or an RFQ, they will specify that it needs to be a Class A survey, which is the 1 in 10,000 closure.
Do they define statutorily what a town is and what a city is? Because it says city or town in there. Because in
Yeah,
Wisconsin, we have different classes of city: Class A, Class B, Class C, and then a village. And that
yeah,
affects the territorial jurisdictional limits of those things.
yeah. That's where I know it was based on population based. I'd have to scroll down to either a
Yeah, because I was going to say, I
different
noticed they got
ARS or different
population in there,
NAC.
so.
Yeah, it did specify, and that's the same for even like our development standards. It's based on population. If you're like under 50,000, you have 90 days to respond. If you're over 50,000 to 100,000, you have 60 days to respond. If you're over 100,000, like those are the way some of our statutes are written. So
Okay, well, and I don't want to get into the discussion now, but
yeah,
this would be a good mentoring Monday one. But when we talk about the levels of accuracy and precision, a lot of these are still written off of the closure as if you were doing a traverse with a total station, right? And the mathematical closure around that traverse and around the perimeter of a boundary. But we could spend 3 days and none of us would still understand what it means. But what does that mean when you're using a GPS and have a total different approach to what that closure report looks like? But jumping back into the book here, what they used to start with was really what they had quite literally on hand, which was their hand. So it says on the bottom of page 22, the measures themselves were derived from the shape of the human body itself and from human activity. It was consistent, it was doable, it was shown right there. And so they give the inch was reckoned to be the width of a finger, usually 16 to the foot, or a thumb, usually 12 to the foot. And then it says the Roman Vitruvius Polio gave the classic definition of its relationship to other measures. So 4 fingers make 1 palm, 4 palms make 1 foot, 16 palms make 1 cubit, 4 cubits makes a man's height. But that's obviously flawed because everyone's a different shape and size there, and so there's inherent inconsistencies with that. It talks about a bushel coming from the amount of seed it would take to sow an acre of ground. Or you've got the cloth. The L was used for cloth, either the width of the loom or the distance from head to wrist, right? And measuring it out. So you've got longer arms, you're going to get a lot more cloth out of that measurement than someone with shorter arms. And so there was opportunities to cheat the system, so if they were selling it, they would use a shorter measurement or a shorter arm, so they got more money for less material. And then if they were buying it, they would use someone with longer arms to get more material for that same cost, at $1 for an arm's length, right? You're getting more out of it. Dan put the most important measurement out there. 3 fingers makes a really good whiskey.
That's a good pour.
That's a good pour. and and so this, then we kind of mentioned this just a second ago, but then all these rulers, they were trying to standardize this, and so the French had a saying, and I'm going to butcher this completely: un roi, une foi, un poids. One king, one faith, one weight. Right, the consistency in that. So they, again, the idea there being they get their part of that. But even France, in this Charlemagne, that was really one of the fronts of getting the standardization. The book talks about France possessed 13 separate lengths for a foot and 18 for the on or the L. So that was a new measurement for me, and 24 for the bousseau or the bushel. And since the 74 parishes of Angoulême near Bordeaux boasted more than 100 sizes of a bushel between them, with one parish alone offering 4 separate varieties. This was something of an underestimate. And so that this gets into the importance of what the society was like in Europe and why the Gunter's chain was so important. Jumping down one more paragraph, it says, the obvious advantages of exact measurement should have made it easy to impose uniform, reliable measures, but they remained local and unchangeable for a reason that is fundamental to the history of weights and measures. However much emperors and rulers might legislate for uniformity, the actual scales, yardsticks, and containers were held by city authorities and landed nobles. So we take for granted quite a bit of what measurements we have. I go buy a tape measure from Lowe's or Home Depot and I just start using it. I buy a new total station and I set it up and I start using it. And never once do I actually check to make sure that what I'm getting is actually measuring correctly, or probably not nearly as much as I should, till I start getting irregularities in my results. But I would just throw this out there, and I'll let Dan speak, and then I'll ask we'll get back to my question here. But Dan, go ahead. Can't hear you.
About now.
Yep.
Okay. I still have no idea why there's 2 mics on there and they say the exact same thing. Anyway, so I got this on Audible. So I'm gonna say when I listened to this part, it got me thinking, like all those different measurements and kind of what we're dealing with now, especially coming into the new version of the foot. Why we have so many different units of measurement accessible to us. And this might sound pretty political, but why don't we go to the metric system like the whole rest of the world does? Is it because we're too stubborn here or what? We tried in Iowa once. I think I was just getting into surveying, so I barely could read the level rod anyway, let alone putting a 3rd decimal place on there. I was like, it was impossible to read that thing back then. But I was just kind of curious, like the more and more I start working with NGS tools, that's all metric, right? That it is actually easier to convert stuff back and forth, especially when you're dealing with buildings that are designed in inches. It's just kind of funny how stubborn we are as Americans not to get off that foot and inches thing.
Yeah,
I agree.
Georgia DOT did it for a while. I don't know if they still are, but they did it, and it was awful.
Yeah, we did it. We did it for a short while, but the thing is, it's like, I think like everything else, you're going to have to get used. Do you imagine how many errors are going to be out there when we switch to the international foot? It's going to be a nightmare.
So South Carolina is on the international foot already.
Have you been for a long time?
I think there's a half a dozen states by statute that are
Yeah, that's what I thought.
international foot. Indiana, Arizona, Michigan, South Carolina, and Utah's got it in our code to be whatever the NGS standard is. So it'll automate if they ever update in the future. we're writing that code right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of surveyors in our state that they go kind of nuts about this. Why are we changing it for? Why we got to do this? Well, we were actually supposed to change it back in the 80s when we switched it into datum, but we're just decided not to do it, I guess. I just think that's funny when you rattle off all those units of measurement. It's like, hey, we're gonna be dealing with that here pretty soon. At least we are in Iowa.
Yeah, there
Yeah,
was
we had a hybrid system using, I think it was back in the 80s, 70s or 80s. Some of our roadway plans are actually in meters. We have to do the back and forth conversion, but I would agree. I mean, I have worked with the metric system, especially when working in Puerto Rico. They only use meters, and I'm comfortable using meters more than than fractions or any other measurement.
Well, let's go back. Let's look back at the chain and everything that's defined that we have today in terms of the chain and units of the chain. To go to the metric system, this is part of the problem we had in Wisconsin. The DOT did go to the metric system for about 5 years, but the biggest complaints they got were from contractors who couldn't, I mean, they were working feet and inches. A number 4 rebar means something in the imperial system. It means absolutely nothing in the metric system. Our degree of curvature is defined in terms of the imperial system. It's not defined in terms of the metric system. What do you use for stationing in a metric system? Because the stations in the imperial system are based on a 100-foot long tape. I mean, so there's a lot of stuff that's built into the system that there is no really handy equivalent in the metric system. Now, I'm not saying the metric system is wrong and all that kind of stuff. There are a lot of advantages to it, but you also got to remember from a surveying perspective, we've always been a decimal system. We've always been a decimal system in the surveying profession. It's everybody else that's on the imperial system that's screwed up.
Said like a real surveyor.
So again, with South Carolina, we're on the international foot. North Carolina, because I'm in Myrtle Beach, 22 miles away, I've got the North Carolina line. They're on the U.S. survey foot. So when you're surveying close to that line, you need to know where you are and what your settings are. Because it
I,
can go south
I always
fast.
got nervous when you came across that dirt work contractor that comes up to your staking hubs. And he's an older gentleman, so you figure he's been doing this for a while. And he goes, "What does this 0.34 mean? What have you been doing ever since you started doing this?" I just shook my head. I couldn't believe that was funny as hell.
I'll say this. So my father-in-law was a woodworker, carpenter, remodeler, jack of all trades. So my wife grew up helping out, doing all that stuff. And we've never been more close to getting a divorce when she pulls out her tape measure and uses, fractions of an inch, and I pull out my tape measure to do a remodel, and I still use my tenths of a foot. So it's a real thing. But I don't know how old this is. I've seen this one before and used it, but here's just a quick list of the states. The interesting thing is it also shows in here NAD 83 legislation by state. And a couple of them don't, and then which ones require or even don't have any.
So I got a question with that. What does none mean? You don't have a foot in Utah?
We don't call out a required conversion because you have to remember NAD 83 was built in the meter, so we don't have a required conversion from the meter into any type of coordinate unit. So technically on our record of survey, we should call out if we have coordinates what unit of measurement we're using. It's assumed that it's a U.S. survey foot in Utah, but
Okay.
we should be calling out what it is.
Yeah, because it does matter. Here in my area, if you had the wrong setting, if you had U.S. survey foot versus international foot and a GPS shot, you're going to be 4.5 feet horizontally off and about 6 feet vertically off. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, and we've been, as a company, involved in lawsuits where someone turns on their GPS and assumes one or the other and stakes the building 20 feet in the wrong location.
I'd like to see a show of hands. I'd like to see a show of hands of people who learned the difference between the international foot and the U.S. foot by a mistake. I never heard of it until our surveyors came over from a different city and they staked out some geopiers. Luckily, they were geopiers and not concrete piers. I didn't know there was two versions of a foot. So,
Yeah, I would say out west, just because Nevada, Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, like you're licensed in multiple states, you're gonna have to deal with it in multiple states. So reading those state statutes, right, to pass your state exam,
Yeah.
that's the big part.
Yeah. Jerry threw into the chat, we'll wrap this whole discussion up, but Jerry threw into the chat, the city of Philadelphia used to use a measurement called the Philadelphia foot. This foot was a unit of measure based on the measurement of a human foot. And so, again,
Who's human foot?
So is that like the college students that forgot their tape measure and they laid Gary down and the bridge was 16 and a half Gary's long?
We actually had a foreign, when I was in graduate school, we had a foreign student from Nigeria, and he said there's a Nigerian foot also.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so this whole first survey foot versus the international foot, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Absolutely. And since it was Philadelphia, was that foot up someone's ass? I just got to throw it out there, right?
Well, it is a city of brotherly love, you know.
You must be a Cowboys fan.
But was
Green
it?
Bay. I like Jerry. I spent time in Wisconsin. I'm a Green Bay fan through and through. League green.
Was it a Philly rod though, or a foot?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so I was going through out here. We kind of got distracted there, which is a good discussion. But I was going to throw out there is, I was saying I'll go buy a new tape measure, and I do nothing to make sure that tape measure actually measures correctly. And if you're on the Facebooks, there's a couple. There's images of those tapes that are off, and on the surveyor's pages there. So throw it out here. Who's actually doing your checks, making sure that you've got equipment that works right? Do you set up your gun and have a 100-foot course in your parking lot and go shoot it and make sure it's 100 foot?
We've got a baseline local here at one of the airports that we can go check on.
With no subsidence?
Yeah, right. I don't know. Good question, Brent. Thanks.
That's what we just talked about on this last week 156 of Mentoring Mondays, was about equipment care and calibrations and those kind of things. But yeah, that was one of the jokes about the subsidence of baselines, and usually they're at universities. And one particular one up in Reno was like a 40,000-pound crane was rolled over the top of one of the original baseline points, and someone's still trying to calibrate against it, right? Like, how do you know you're good? So,
or I mean, I don't know how many still use a steel tape versus a cloth tape, but are you
right.
are you doing the calculations for the temperature? Or on a cloth tape, are you pulling it to the right tension to get it right? And there's all these small things. We get so caught up that the total station can measure to this, but then we go pull the tape to check it, and we're doing nothing to get anywhere close to that. So just a thought here when we're talking about in this book all the errors in measurement and the problems they had is we do nothing still today by and large to mitigate some of those errors that still exist.
Yeah, I suggest going and watch 156. It was Marty Crook. He's got 46 years of equipment calibration for a local dealer here out the west. So Trent would know Monson Engineering, but Marty's been with that aspect, that side of the profession for 46 years, and he did an amazing presentation this week. So yeah, it's pretty good.
Good. Yeah, everyone go watch that.
Yep.
So continuing on here, The author talked about a few other systems. He talks about the sterling system, linking weights to coinage. There were 240 penny weights to the pound. And interestingly enough, this system lasted for more than 700 years until 1972, which is pretty interesting in our modern age to still have that. And in North America, it was superseded by the dollar. The gold standard, is now the dollar standard, right? And so he says it was against this background of incessant variation, deceit, and falsehood in weights and measurements that the precision of Gunter's chain needs to be set. More than any of her predecessors, Elizabeth was responsive to the power of the House of Commons and the people represented there. The contrast between the way she legislated for weight and for length and area was significant. And we talked about this a little bit last chapter, but the difference we're seeing, and again, the point of this book is the growth of the United States, the greatest land sale in history, the change of the American dream, and even what was happening in Europe from lords and kings holding all the land to the common people beginning to have ownership and mapping that ownership and owning it. So it says here, where weight was concerned, she found it necessary to add the Troy system, the heavier avoirdupois, which literally means having weight range, which went from ounces through pounds to stones and hundredweights and tons. Troy was ideal for measuring small items like gold and silver, but the main English export was wool, which was traded in elephantine quantities, and in the Flemish markets was always weighed in avoirdupois. It was a concession to variability to use the goldsmith's Troy weight for light objects and wool merchants' avoirdupois for heavy ones, or similar surrendered appeared in her decision to legislate for a large gallon for measuring beer and a small gallon for measuring wine. Adding to the confusion, careless wording of the specifications for containers resulted in 4 sizes of bushels being legalized for measuring grain and flours. It gets into, again, the length of a mile at 1,760 yards, the Roman distance at 5,000 feet, or 1,667 yards. The new length was a concession to surveying needs. It represented 8 furlongs of 220 yards each. The easiest way to measure out an acre was in the form of an oblong, 220 yards long by 22 yards broad, or in a surveyor's terminology, 40 perches by 4 perches. And this is really interesting, that getting into the importance of these mathematicians and surveyors and how closely they were tied together, or really they were the same in this time. The surveyors were the smart guys doing these measurements and these calculations out there, and the influence they had on these measurements. It says in the next chapter, talking about the 16-inch foot versus the larger unit 12-foot. Surveyors were not interested in such small quantities, and the more convenient foot of 12 larger inches gradually superseded it. The critical unit was the yard, which went to make up the perch.
Sorry.
So you moved it for me. Let's read it. You're good. The furlong and the mile, and here the precision was remarkable. In 1601, a brass yardstick was constructed as a standard for the country as a whole. Exactness was what the market required, and when Elizabeth's yard was measured in 1797 against the inches, feet, and yards used by 18th century scientists, it was found to be precisely 36.015 inches long. Pretty impressive for the era. So once Elizabeth got this measurement in and legislated, she actually had the description of these was read twice a year for the next 4 years and was posted at every church across the land there, to make sure that everyone understood it. And I think that's interesting. We're talking about, with this new state plane coordinate system, how are we going to get the word out to everyone that matters?
We're working on that right now. We just had a state board meeting yesterday about that.
Yeah, we had a committee meeting yesterday ourselves talking about how to get this out and where and who,
And identifying stakeholders.
and identifying stakeholders. Because the interesting thing is we pass this really weird side note here, right? But let's go with it. As we talk about this, because it's a survey related matter, and it's a land related matter to some extent. Our lobbyist talks about, well, do we need to get the land rights coalition involved in this, because they usually have something to say about what we do, but measurements is more of a standard than a land rights issue. So are they stakeholder? But if we don't involve them, are they going to say something? And so who do we get involved in this was a really interesting discussion.
Well, all we know is that they're going to exclude UDOT from whatever they decide to do.
Or any DOT, you mean?
Exactly. Those are the biggest stakeholders.
Yeah.
Luckily, our committee co-chair is high up in UDOT, so we've got their clout behind us and buy-in. To wrap up the chapter here, oops, let's see. Oh, I almost skipped a page here. It talks about navigation. Gunter's crossstaff and quadrant was used to find latitude in the trackless ocean. In Francis Bacon, who advocated measurement and experimentation as the basis of science. So now we get into the scientific age. It's really interesting to me how just even the beginning of let's get these measurements right, you start to see the scientific age start to grow more with precision in our measurements and in the language they were using. And then there was a joke from King Henry wooing his French princess with puns in Shakespeare's Henry V. For the one I have neither words nor measure, for the other I have no strength in measure, yet a reasonable measure in strength. It was a joke tailored to that particular audience. Without measure, music was noise, poetry babble, and the land wilderness, and none knew it better than the enclosing acquisitive gentry, the generation whose parents and grandparents first bought their land from Henry VIII, who stamped the Elizabethan age with their energy and imagination, and for whose benefit the legislation on measures was passed. So we're giving shape to more, in this case, the line there, more than just the land, but to music, to poetry. But I just love the completeness of what this means for society. And now we're bringing this back to the United States. John Winthrop was a man that fit this generation. And he volunteered to take charge of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He was an authoritarian, clear-sighted, charismatic. He was the colony's first government, and imbued it not only with his ideals of communal responsibility and individual conscience, but with his attitude towards property. And so there's John Winthrop and this Roger Williams from the Rhode Island colony. Roger Williams believed that the land rightly belonged to the native inhabitants and should be bought from them first. But Winthrop stated, as for the natives in New England, he wrote, they enclose no land, neither have any settlement habitation, nor any tame cattle to prowl the land by. So since the Native Americans had nothing to show that they owned the land, the new Americans could take it freely, and New England, like the old, would belong to those who could measure it and enclose it. Really interesting juxtaposition of approaches there of who can and does own land, and we can see the influences of what happened to the Native Americans here and how they were pushed off as the British came in and knew they could measure it and enclose it and own it. Again, that new concept. That brings us to the end of the chapter. Any thoughts on those last little bit about enclosing and measuring in America?
Yeah, like we said, it was kind of a shorter chapter tonight, but
Yep.
yeah, some of these we're not going to take a full 90 minutes, but
It was short, but it was good.
yeah.
But
No, it's
it really did, break down the, standard and, need for a standard of measurement. I liked it.
Yeah, I will show this one last thing. I think we get Jerry sent an email earlier today. I think we'll get this in the next chapter, but a horse measure. They talked about, so it was, he described it in the book, but it was looking under a horse, kneeling, looking under a horse, how far you could see. So a horse measure was about 2 miles. So I think it was in the next chapter we'll get into a few more of these types of measurements here.
So have you all heard about the Vera system? I know that was used in Texas for a while.
the Spanish Vera. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yep.
when the horse's right hoof hit the ground, so all you got to do is get a very large horse, and you got more Vera than your neighbor.
Well, in one of the Brown books, the Robillard books, talks about they reference the time it takes a man to smoke two cigarettes riding a horse. Right, was the back line.
Get an extra long cigarette. No, it's interesting just to see how the politics are involved here because you've got the top, the kings and the noblemen and everyone pushing down and saying, "Hey, we've got to get a standard of measure and it's going to be this or that." But then you got people, the ones in the markets, the ones that are, you know, actually building or plowing the fields and sewing the dresses and doing all of that work. And they're using what they have on them. I mean, they don't have a brass yard. They don't have, a stick. They're not going to go all the way back into town just to check that. They're going to use what they're familiar with. And what they're familiar with is what they can see, their hands, their feet, uh, the shapes of their body. And so, when you get these measurements, like how far you can hear a shout from, I mean, that and that depends on how loud you're shouting, right? Or whether or not the other guy can hear. Very subjective, but we still kind of use some of those measurements today, not in an official capacity, but a stone's throw. You guys still use that phrase? It's just a stone's throw away. I mean, it hasn't gone away, and it doesn't matter how formal we want to make our measurement. Uh, we need to decide whether it needs to be precise or not. Getting directly to surveying, just turning another conversation we had on its head briefly, we were talking about what state codes were requiring as far as precision goes. And, the ironic thing with precision is then you get things like pincushion corners where there are 4 or 5 or 6 or a dozen different markers supposedly for the same spot. And does the precision do us any good? And I can tell you, like in an urban or suburban area, I might be a little bit more concerned about getting the measurement precise than I would if I were out in a 40-acre field with old rundown fences and my math puts me within a foot of the post and I say, you know what, that post is good enough. I'm measuring to hundredths of a foot in one situation and not necessarily to the other. Now, I'm keeping to the standard. I can say my mathematical closure is 1 to 10,000 or whatever that is, but my opinion is sometimes it gets looser when I'm not required to be that precise because I'm going to do what the people are doing. And the people are not going out and getting that brass yard and measuring it themselves. They're saying, my fence looks good here. I'm going to string it up this way. Is that okay, Bill? Yeah. And you and Bill go out and you build that fence and use it for 40 years. I mean, or 60 or 80 or 100. So, it's interesting that, again, just the juxtaposition of how people really measure and how we measure as surveyors and how I guess government expects you to measure, they're still as just disjointed as they always have been. And it's really kind of fun to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jerry, I just got one question. I just want to know what state are you in?
Mentally or physically?
No.
I'm in Wisconsin.
No, Jeremiah, who was just talking.
Oh, Jeremiah. Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
he's Utah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a Utah
okay.
guy.
Just curious.
Jeremiah's just down the street from me here. He and I work closely together. He's one of the smarter surveyors in Utah. So
Trent's about 3 stones throws away from me.
That kind of related along that line, then why do we go with a 95% confidence interval instead of the standard 39% for a error ellipse and stuff, where we're actually increasing the uncertainty when we do that?
good question.
Guess you're going to tell us, Jerry.
Hell, I'm not gonna tell you.
Well, so Jerry, thank you for putting this in the chat. I must have missed it in my highlights as I was reading through here, but there are a couple other really unique measurements. So we showed the measurement of the horse measure, right? They call it a horse belly view. But we also have the English bow shot, the distance the arrow would fly, versus the French coupe, which is how far the shot would carry. And Trent keeps moving the screen on me, so I can't read these. The horse belly view. Oh, yeah, I think that was it. Those three there were unique measurements there. And of course, we've got some scriptural references here about not being dishonest and having a solid, uniform measurement, both out of Deuteronomy and the Quran there. So,
Amen.
where's Jeff Lucas when you need him here? Okay, well, I appreciate this. This is another good discussion, and really, really excited what this is building up to and building on, so we can get into more of the American history with this and what these measurements mean. So, our next meeting is
should be in 2 weeks. So
the 12th. No, that's
November 5th.
November 5th.
Yep, November 5th. And Who Owned America? Chapter 3.
Yep. Okay.
And Aaron's already got his thoughts ready to go.
I'm already there.
You're gonna have to reread it once more just to refresh yourself. 2 weeks.
Yes, I will.
That's
I've got things highlighted. I'll go back over it.
I love it.
Okay.
Awesome,
Well,
everybody.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.